what's up? Richie here with your Saturday 3:30 games and on. Check out my other previews for the noon games and the primetime games, but this is the 3:30 games and a whole bunch of them, so let's get through it. This is satisfying football. Alright, the first one at 3:30 is Alabama and South Carolina. Alabama, they beat New Mexico State last week 62-10. Tua Tagovailoa was 16-24, 227, 3 touchdowns. Wide receiver Jerry Jeudy had 8 catches, 103, 3 touchdowns. They had 603 yards of offense. Their defense had 3 sacks and 3 turnovers. They dominated. South Carolina was starting a true freshman quarterback in Ryan Hilinski. They dominated Charleston Southern 72-10. Ryan Hilinski was solid for his first start, 24, 30, 282, 2 touchdowns, a pick. Running back Kevin Harris had 147 yards and 3 touchdowns. Running back Mon Denson had 118 rushing and 1 touchdown. They ran for 493 as a team. Wide receiver Brian Edwards had 5 receptions, 112, and 2 touchdowns. They had 775 yards of total offense. The defense had 3 interceptions. They only allowed 72 rushing yards. I'd like to say this would be a close game, but I can't see it. I think Alabama's too good. Alright, interesting non-conference game. Stanford has to fly across the country to Orlando to place the ranked UCF Knights. Stanford, they lost their game last week 45-20 to USC. Their quarterback KJ Costello was hurt, so their backup freshman Davis Mills came in. He was okay. He was 22 of 36, 237, 1 touchdown, 1 pick. He only ran for 98 yards. KJ should return, but the defense did allow 377 yards passing to a true freshman quarterback in Keaton Slovis for USC, who played really, really well. And UCF has a really, really good offense. They played Florida Atlantic. They beat them 48-14, and that game was actually called with 4 minutes and 20 seconds left because of lightning, so it could have been even more. And even within that time, they still had 574 total yards of offense. They ran for 312. True freshman quarterback Dylan Gabriel actually started because Brandon Wimbush was kind of injured, they said, whatever. Dylan Gabriel, his completion percentage was not good. He was 7 of 19, but he completed them for 245 yards and 2 touchdown passes. Wimbush should be back this game, and Darryl Mack, who's been hurt, he's been cleared to play, so who knows who's going to start with that one. The defense did have 5 sacks. This will be really interesting. Stanford, they haven't looked very good the last few games, but they still like to pound it. They play decent defense. They have a really good defensive back in Paulson and Debo, who'll be like a top 15 or 20 pick in the NFL draft next year. And they want to try to keep the ball away from UCF, so the UCF quarterbacks have to hit the passes that can get, obviously, because they're going to have a lot of deep passes and wide open passes. In the first couple of weeks, their quarterbacks haven't quite hit all of them. Gabriel has been able to hit them. Wimbush hasn't. So, but they have a really strong running game, one of the best, running games maybe in America. So I think UCF should take that one, but it'll be an interesting game. Alright, another one, USC taking on BYU. USC, as I just mentioned, they beat Stanford 45-20. True freshman quarterback Keaton Slovis, 28 of 33, 377 yards, 3 touchdowns. He looked awesome. He's better than JT Daniels, who was the quarterback that got hurt and missed the rest of the season. That's why Keaton's playing. I think Keaton takes that job. Wide receiver Tyler Vaughns had 106 receiving yards and a touchdown. They had 492 total yards. Their defense only allowed 98 rushing yards to Stanford, and they had 3 sacks. BYU went into Tennessee. They took them to double overtime, and they won 29-26. Quarterback Zach Wilson was fine, 19 of 29, 232, and a touchdown. Wide receiver Micah Simon had 127 receiving yards, and they had a 64-yard pass with 6 seconds left to set up the tying field goal to even send it in overtime. So that'll be interesting, but I think USC probably does do that. East Carolina taking on Navy. East Carolina had a pretty easy game against 1AA Gardner-Webb, 48-9. Running back Darius Penix, 134 rushing yards, 2 touchdowns, and Demetrius Monty had 107 rushing yards. They ran for 365 as a team. Their defense had 5 sacks. They only allowed 186 total yards, and they had 2 interceptions. Navy is coming off a bye week, but their first week they beat Holy Cross 45-7. They ran for 428 yards as a team. They're a triple option team. Their defense had 3 sacks and 64 rushing yards. This should be a pretty even game. I think I lean to Navy with the pick here, but it should be pretty close. All right, Memphis is taking on South Alabama. Memphis, they beat Southern 55-24. Brady White was 17 of 21 for 337, 2 touchdowns. Wide receiver Devontae Coxey had 6 receptions for 112 yards. They put up 575 total. They did allow Southern to move it quite a bit. It was pretty close, pretty early on, and Memphis kind of went away with it. South Alabama, 2 weeks ago, they only lost to Nebraska 35-21. They came back in that game. This past week, they beat Jackson State 37-14. Running back Trey Minter ran for 189 yards and 2 touchdowns. They ran for 413 yards as a team. They had 538 total yards. And but they did have 3 turnovers, so maybe they can keep it close with their running game. But I think Memphis wins that. All right, Army losing a heartbreaker in overtime to Michigan. They lost 24-21 in double overtime. They ran for 200 yards against a decent defense. They did have 3 turnovers, one that ended the game. Their defense did have 4 sacks. They forced 3 turnovers, and they only held Michigan to 108 rushing yards. UTSA, Texas San Antonio, they lost 63-14 to Baylor. They did run for 164 yards, but their defense allowed 546. I think Army probably gets back on track here. Georgia Southern, they only beat UNLV Maine 26-18. Their quarterback Shea Wertz was injured and out of that game, and we're not sure if he'll be back for this game against Minnesota. But they beat Maine. They ran for 395 rushing as a team. They are a triple option. And they actually did have 3 guys rush for over 100 yards. Running back Matt LaRoche, 154 and a touchdown. Running back Logan Wright, 132 and a touchdown. And their backup quarterback who started, Justin Tomlin, ran for 114 yards himself. Their defense allowed only 52 rushing yards, and they forced 2 turnovers. Minnesota had a really great game against Fresno State. It was a fun game to watch. It was back and forth. They scored a touchdown with like 20 seconds left, or under a minute left on a 4th down play to tie it to send it to overtime. They beat Fresno State in double overtime 38-35. Quarterback Tanner Morgan was 16 of 23, 234, 2 touchdowns. Wide receiver Rashad Bateman had 7 receptions, 105 and a touchdown. They did have 3 turnovers. Their defense forced 4 sacks, only allowed 57 rush yards, and forced 2 interceptions. I'm kind of leaning towards Minnesota here. If Shea Wertz can play, maybe he can spring a bit of an upset. A triple option is always tough to stop, but I think Minnesota will go there. All right, then you got UNLV and Northwestern. UNLV, they lost last week to Arkansas State 43-17. Quarterback Armani Rogers was pretty terrible. He was only 8 of 23 for 42 yards and threw an interception. But their running back Charles Williams ran for 168 yards and a touchdown. But their defense allowed 498. Northwestern is coming off a bye, but their first week against Stanford, their offense didn't look good at all. They lost 17-7. They had 2 quarterbacks combined for 12 for 27. They had 210 total yards. They had 4 turnovers. Honestly, UNLV could spring a cool upset here. I think I went with Northwestern in the picks with this, but this actually could be pretty close. Oklahoma State taking on Tulsa. Oklahoma State, they beat McNeese State 56-14. Quarterback Spencer Sanders was great. 12 for 18, 250, 3 touchdowns plus 51 rushing yards. Then Hawaii transfer quarterback Drew Brown came in to play a little bit. 7 for 10, 142 and 2 touchdowns. Wide receiver Tylen Wallace, I think, should have won the Blitnikoff Award last year. He had 5 catches, 180 yards, and 3 touchdowns. They had 580 total yards. Their defense had 2 interceptions and a pick 6. And they're taking on a Tulsa team that beat San Jose State 34-16. Baylor transfer quarterback Zach Smith was 21 of 28 for 283 and a touchdown. Running back Shamar Brooks ran for 140 and a touchdown. They ran for 256. Wide receiver Sam Crawford Jr. had 9 receptions, 137 yards. They had 539 total yards. However, they did have 12 penalties, so their offense could possibly maybe keep up with Oklahoma State in this if they cannot have all those penalties. This could be a shootout for a little bit, for like a quarter or something, but I think Oklahoma State ends up blowing them out. All right, Arizona State taking on Michigan State. An interesting non-conference game on paper, but Arizona State, they struggled against UNLV Sacramento State. They only won 19-7. It was only 3-0 at halftime. They could only get field goals. I'll shout out their kicker, Christensen Dejas. He was 4 for 4 for the field goals. Jaden Daniels, he had nice stats. The quarterback for Arizona State, 17 of 27, 304 and a touchdown. But that wasn't until late. When they were only up 12-0, and then with 6:20 left, Sacramento State scored a touchdown. They were up 12-7. Then the next drive, Jaden threw a 72-yard touchdown pass to running back Benjamin, and that was the score, 19-7. They only had 91 rushing yards. Their defense did have 3 sacks. They did allow only 42 rushing yards, but on offense, they got to do a lot better than that against a really tough Michigan State defense who held Western Michigan's high-flying offense down. They beat them 51-17. Brian Lewerke was 23 of 32, 314, 3 touchdowns and a pick. Running back Elijah Collins ran for 192. Wide receiver Darrell Stewart had 10 catches, 185 and a touchdown. Their defense had 3 sacks, forced 3 turnovers, and only allowed 67 rushing yards. Their offense had 582 total yards. Arizona State, if I remember right, beat them last year, 16-13. I think Michigan State might get some payback here. It could be interesting for a while. Arizona State does have one of the best running backs in the country. Benjamin, maybe they can use him to their advantage, but we'll see. All right, game day is going to Ames, Iowa for the Iowa Hawkeyes in the Iowa State game. Iowa, they beat Rutgers 30-0. Nate Stanley was really solid, 236 passing, 3 touchdown passes. Wide receiver Amir Smith-Marset, 4 catches, 113 and 2 touchdowns. Their defense forced 3 turnovers, only allowed 125 total yards. Rutgers quarterbacks combined for 10 for 27 and threw 2 interceptions. Iowa State, they're coming off a bye, but their first week, they beat 1AA Northern Iowa in 3 overtimes, 29-26. Brock Purdy was 30 of 41, 278 and 2 touchdowns. Wide receiver Deshaunte Jones had 14 receptions for 126 yards. Their defense had 3 sacks. They had 34 rushing yards. They didn't play very well. I mean, this is a rivalry. You throw all that stuff out the window. I think I got Iowa Hawkeyes in this one, but Iowa State always plays these teams tough. So, all right, you got Ole Miss taking on 1AA Southeastern Louisiana. Ole Miss bounced back, kind of like I thought they would. They beat Arkansas 31-17. Their offense got going a little bit. Quarterback Matt Corral was 16 of 24, 246, 2 touchdowns, ran for 46 yards. Running back Scotty Phillips ran for 143 and 2 touchdowns. Wide receiver Elijah Moore had 7 catches, 130 and 2 touchdowns. Their defense had 3 sacks, and I think that they keep rolling here with the win. Colorado State taking on Arkansas. Colorado State, they beat Western Illinois 38-13. Colin Hill put up great numbers again, second week in a row. He did that, 24 of 31, 364 passing, 4 touchdown passes. Wide receiver Dante Wright, 6 receptions, 108 yards and a touchdown. They had 582 total yards. Their defense actually had 7 sacks in this game. They only allowed 215 total yards. And they're taking on an Arkansas team with an offensive-minded head coach, but their offense is nowhere to be found. They lost to Ole Miss 31-17. They only had 61 rushing yards. I can't remember who I picked in this. I think I might have gone to Colorado State. I don't know. This could be a, quote, upset. I think Arkansas is favored by 10, which is kind of ludicrous to me. We'll see how that goes. All right, then we got Louisville taking on Western Kentucky. Louisville, they got off the schneid. They were on a 10-game losing streak, and they beat Eastern Kentucky 42-0. Jawan Pass was 12 of 19, 196, 4 touchdowns, and threw a pick. He had a really good game. Running back Javian Hawkins ran for 123. They ran for 322 as a team. They had 542 total yards. The defense had 5 sacks. They only allowed 172 yards of offense to Eastern Kentucky. And they're taking on a Western Kentucky team that beat Florida International, and I'm not really sure how. They beat them 20-14. The running back Gage Walker had a nice game, 100 rushing yards and a touchdown. But they threw 2 interceptions, and I think the only reason they really won is FIU quarterbacks combined for 5 for 18, because Stephen Duncan for Western Kentucky didn't have a very good game. Statistically, it didn't look like a good game. It's just FIU couldn't complete passes, and that's about it. But I think I got Louisville here winning that one. Bethune-Cookman taking on Miami. Miami is 0-2 for the first time since 1978. They lost another heartbreaker at the end. They were down 17-3 to North Carolina. They came back to they were winning 25-20, and then with a minute left, true freshman quarterback Sam Howell for North Carolina got a touchdown. They won 28-25. Miami quarterback Jared Williams had a really good game, 30 of 39 for 309 yards and 2 touchdowns. Running back DJ Dallas ran for 107. They ran for 179 as a team. Their defense had 4 sacks. They only allowed 97 rushing yards. I'm not really sure how they lost this game. They didn't turn it over. Neither. I'm not really sure, but I think they should finally get off the schneid here and beat Bethune-Cookman. Then you got 1AA Idaho State taking on Utah. Utah, they beat Northern Illinois 35-17, but it was actually close. It was like 14-14 for a while. They did run for 193. Their defense had 4 sacks, and they only allowed 67 rushing yards. And Utah kind of just, ho-hum, did what they did and won. And I think they keep it going. Interesting non-conference game. North Texas taking on a Cal team. Now North Texas, they lost to SMU 49-27. They only had 185 passing yards, which is surprising because they have one of the best passing quarterbacks in the country. Mason Fine the last 2 years has been wonderful. I expected that to be a shootout. I didn't expect them to be blown out. Running back Trey Siggers ran for 164 yards and a touchdown. They did run for 211 as a team. However, their defense did allow 503 yards. On the flip side here, Cal, they had a nice upset against a ranked Washington team. They beat them 20-19. They did run for 192 yards as a team because they didn't do a whole lot passing. They didn't really need to. That's not really their style. Their defense had 4 sacks. They forced 2 turnovers. They held Washington to 6 for 16 on 3rd downs, however, their offense was only 3 for 11 on 3rd downs. This is kind of a scary game for Cal because North Texas can turn it on at any time. Cal has a really good running back in Christopher Brown. They have a really tough defense, but North Texas has a really good offense. They got a good team. This could be interesting. I think I'd pick Cal here, but this is one to keep an eye on for sure. Next game, you got 1AA Cal Poly taking on Oregon State. Oregon State, they lost 31-28 at Hawaii. Running back Jamar Jefferson had a great game, 183 yards and a touchdown. They ran for 263 as a team. Jamar Jefferson ran for 183 yards and a touchdown. They had 432 total yards. Their defense had 3 sacks. However, they did allow 421 passing yards to Hawaii. They had 9 penalties, and they were only 5 for 15 on 3rd down. But I think they come back and win here. Louisiana Tech taking on Bowling Green. Louisiana Tech, they beat Grambling 20-14. They didn't play so well after halftime. They're up 20-0, and they allowed 14 points. Their D did allow 455 yards to Grambling. Bowling Green, they got blown out 52-0 to Kansas State. Their quarterbacks were only 11 for 24. They only had 140 total yards, and their defense allowed 521 total yards. However, the first week, Bowling Green put up great numbers on offense. I think Kansas State's a really tough team this year. This game could actually potentially be a bit of a shootout, though, not just based on this last week game. Louisiana Tech usually can pass it for a lot of yards, and so can Bowling Green. So it may be a pretty fun game to watch. 1AA Idaho taking on Wyoming. Wyoming, they beat Texas State 23-14. They had 190 rushing yards, but quarterback Sean Chambers, he was only 8 for 18 for 103. He threw an interception. I'll shout out another kicker here, Cooper Roth. It was 3 for 3. Their defense played well, though. They did have 5 sacks. They only had 50 rushing yards. They forced 3 turnovers, and they had a pick 6. And I think they should keep that going here against Idaho with the win. Buffalo taking on Liberty. Buffalo, they lost 45-13 to Penn State, but they actually played them really tough. They were up 10-7 at halftime. They had 184 rushing yards. Wide receiver Antonio Nunn had 5 receptions for 113 yards. They had 429 yards of offense, and if I remember right, they outgained Penn State in that game. Their defense had 3 sacks. They only allowed Penn State 78 rushing yards. It's just Penn State kind of capitalized. They're taking on a Liberty team who I thought would be better than they are right now, but they lost 35-14 to Louisiana Lafayette, which is a really good team. Liberty's running back, Frankie Hickson, had a good game, 133 and a touchdown, but the quarterback, however, he was kind of so-so. Their defense allowed 407 rushing yards to Louisiana Lafayette. Now, Louisiana Lafayette does have maybe the best, or one of the best trio of running backs in the country, in my opinion. But even still, you know, if Liberty wants to win, they gotta win those kind of games against those teams. And they allowed 593 yards. I think Buffalo, they allowed 593 yards. I think Buffalo should take this. 1AA South Carolina State taking on USF. USF has been terrible. They lost to Georgia Tech 14-10. They just missed a touchdown by like centimeters where they fumbled it. They could have won that game. They only had 93 rushing yards. They only had 169 total yards. It was another ugly loss. Blake Barnett does not look very good at quarterback. Their offense, they got a new offensive coordinator, but he's not looking good. I think they need to fire Charlie Strong. They should bounce back here and get a win. If they don't, Charlie Strong is gone. Next game, we got UMass taking on Charlotte. UMass took it on the chin against a 1AA Southern Illinois team. They lost 45-20. Their defense allowed 502 yards. They had 10 penalties. There was nothing good to say about this UMass team. Whereas Charlotte, they lost Appalachian State, anybody who's watched Appalachian State is a great team. They did lose, but only 56-41. It was actually kind of back and forth for a while. Quarterback Chris Reynolds was 20 of 31, 296, 4 touchdowns, threw a pick. Wide receiver Michael Ace Elder had 7 catches for 119. Running back Benny LeMay had 118 rushing yards and 2 touchdowns. They did have 533 total yards. They outgained App State, but they had 2 turnovers. Their defense had 3 sacks. However, they allowed 276 rushing yards. And basically, they lost the game where they allowed a blocked punt that was returned for a touchdown. And then late in the game, when they were only down 49-41, they tried an onside kick, and App State actually returned the onside kick for a touchdown, which made the final score 56-41. So I think Charlotte should take this game here. Then you got Southern Miss taking on Troy. Southern Miss lost to Mississippi State 38-15. Jack Abraham, the quarterback for Southern Miss, was solid, 18-26, 234, 2 touchdowns. He did throw 2 picks. They had 3 turnovers as a team, but their defense had 3 sacks. If he didn't turn over, maybe they could have kept it a little bit closer against Mississippi State. Who knows? Troy, they're coming off a bye week. Their first week, they beat Campbell 43-14, a 1AA team. Quarterback Caleb Barker was 18-29 for 282 and 2 touchdowns. Running back B.J. Smith, who had 1,000 yards rushing last year, he ran for 108 and a touchdown. They had 2 wide receivers go over 100 receiving yards. Reggie Todd, 3 catches, 108, 1 touchdown. And wide receiver Kalen Geiger, 5 catches, 104 yards. They had 527 total yards. Their defense only allowed 143. They had 5 sacks in that game. I'm interested in this game. I think this could be a bit of a shootout. Southern Miss is usually a decent offense and in a decent team, and it's USA. Troy has won 10 games each of the last 3 years, and the Sun Mountain normally has a really good offense and a good team overall. This could be an interesting one. Ohio taking on Marshall, another interesting one in my opinion. Ohio did lose to Pitt 20-10. They only had 35 rushing yards. They were sacked 6 times, but they have a quarterback, Nathan Rourke, who didn't play well against Pitt, but normally I keep calling him the Canadian Tim Tebow. He can rush it and pass it very well. Marshall, they lost a really tough, close game to Boise State, only 14-7. They had 172 total yards, which wasn't good. They had the 2 turnovers, which wasn't good. Their defense had 2 turnovers, but they allowed Boise State to go 10 for 17 on 3rd downs, which was kind of ended up being the game. And I think this could be a really pretty fun game, though, too, back and forth, too. Isaiah Green, the quarterback from Marshall, also a really good quarterback. And then you got Kent State taking on Auburn. Kent State barely beat 1AA Kennesaw State in overtime, 26-23. Quarterback Dustin Crum was 17-23, 192 and a touchdown, and ran for 21 yards and 1 touchdown. They had 145 rushing yards. Wide receiver Isaiah McCoy had 7 receptions for 125 yards and a touchdown. Auburn did struggle a little bit against a pretty good Tulane team that the week before had run for like 350 yards in their game. They held them to only 120 rushing yards. Auburn had 172 rushing as their team. Their defense allowed only 223 total. And I think the biggest stat here was Justin McMillan, the quarterback for Tulane, was only 10 of 33. And Auburn only beat him really 24-6. So if he would have completed even half of them, it could have been a totally different game. But I think Auburn should smack Kent State here. Florida taking on Kentucky. Florida had a pretty easy win against UT Martin, 45-0. Even though they started really slow, it was 3-0 after the first quarter, 17-0. 3-0 after the first quarter, 17-0 by halftime. Felipe Franks statistically had a really good game. He was 25 of 27 for 270 yards and 2 touchdowns. I don't expect him to do that against Kentucky. They did have 543 total yards. Their defense had 5 sacks, only allowed 194 total. Whereas Kentucky beat Eastern Michigan 38-17, but their quarterback Terry Wilson was hurt, and I don't believe he'll be playing this game. Their backup is a transfer, Sawyer Smith, I think it is. He's a transfer from Troy. He's actually pretty good, so they can't really take him lightly. But they did have 239 rushing yards. They had 461 total yards against Eastern Michigan. However, they did allow 337 passing yards to Eastern Michigan. Florida lost to Kentucky last year for the first time in 31 years. I think Florida wants some revenge, so I'm hoping, as a Gator fan, that Florida gets it here. 1AA Lamar taking on Texas A&M. Texas A&M, they lost 24-10 at Clemson. They only had 53 rushing yards. Quarterback Mon was 24-42, 236 at 1 touchdown, 1 pick. They weren't very good. To be honest, Clemson wasn't very good, really. It was 24-10. I think Clemson might lose a couple of games this year. Y'all don't want to hear that, but whatever. I think Texas A&M bounces back here and rolls over Lamar. They got New Hampshire 1AA taking on Florida International. Florida International, they, as I said earlier, they lost 20-14 to Western Kentucky. They did run for 151 yards, but the quarterbacks were 5 for 18. Their defense had 2 interceptions. They only allowed 98 rushing yards. I think that's pretty much why they lost, is their quarterbacks could not complete passes. I think they will here, and I think they win. Texas State taking on SMU. Texas State has a new quarterback coach this year, Jake Spavital, who is an air raid guy under Mike Leach at one time and all over the place. And he brought in a quarterback, Gress Jensen, a transfer from Montana, I believe. They did lose to Wyoming 23-14, but Gress Jensen was 33 of 54 for 394, 1 touchdown. He did throw 2 interceptions. They only ran for 50 yards, and they had 3 turnovers, which was part of why they lost. Whereas SMU under Sonny Dykes, he's a Mike Leach disciple, coach under him a long time ago. They pass it all over the place. They beat North Texas 49-27. Shane Buechele, the quarterback transfer from Texas, he's putting up great numbers. He was 21 of 31, 292, 3 touchdowns. Running back Xavier Jones ran for 127 yards and 3 touchdowns. Wide receiver James Prochet had 7 catches, 115 and a touchdown. They had 530 total yards. Their defense had 5 sacks. I think SMU should roll over Texas State. Now this Texas State team is going to pass it a lot this year, and who knows, maybe we'll have a shootout here, but I got SMU in this one. 1AA Weber State taking on Nevada. Nevada didn't show up against Oregon. After upsetting Purdue the week before, they lost 77-6 to Oregon. They only had 192 total yards. Quarterback Carson Strong was 13 of 25 for 89 yards and threw 2 interceptions. Their defense allowed 623 total yards. All that being said, I think they washed it out and they beat Weber State here. Georgia State taking on Western Michigan. This is a pretty interesting one to me. You got a Sunbelt teams 2-0. Western Michigan is 1-1. 2 pretty good offenses. Now Georgia State struggled with Furman. They were down like 20-3 at one time, but they came back to win 48-42. Quarterback Dan Ellington was 29 of 37 for 362, 5 touchdown passes, plus 86 more rushing yards. They ran for 204 as a team. Wide receiver Cornelius McCoy had 10 catches, 143 and a touchdown. They did have 566 total yards. Their defense had 3 sacks, but allowed 526 to 1AA Furman. Whereas Western Michigan, they lost 51-17 to Michigan State. John Wassink was 23 of 37, 252, 1 touchdown, 2 picks. They only had 67 rushing yards. Their defense allowed 582 total yards. They had 3 turnovers on offense, but that's against a really, really good Michigan State team and defense. The week before, John Wassink had 5 touchdown passes. Normally, they can move it pretty well. I expect a shootout here. a fun game to watch. I think I leaned a little to Western Michigan, but it'll be fun. 1AA Murray State taking on Toledo. Toledo had a bye the week before. They lost 38-24 to Kentucky. They did have 181 rushing yards in that game. They were close. They were back and forth. It was like 14 all at one point, and then they kind of lost it. But I think they bounce back here and get a win over Murray State. And the final game for the 3:30 time slot, 7 o'clock, Duke and Middle Tennessee State. This could be interesting. Duke beat NC A&T, a 1AA team, 45-13. Quarterback Quentin Harris was 30-42, 345, and 4 touchdowns. Wide receiver Jalen Calhoun had 8 catches, 105, and 2 touchdowns. Whereas Middle Tennessee State, who a couple of weeks ago played Michigan pretty tough, beat their 1AA team Tennessee State 45-26. Quarterback Asho O'Hara, remember that name. He was 22 of 30, 367, 4 touchdowns, 1 interception, and ran for 103 yards as well. So he had 470 yards of offense alone. Then they had running back Shaton Mobley run for 104 yards and 2 touchdowns. They have a defensive back Reed Blankenship, had 2 interceptions. They had 604 yards of offense on their offensively. However, they did allow 466 yards to 1AA Tennessee State. But this could be a mini upset over Duke. I think Duke is favored. Yeah, Duke is favored by 6. This could be kind of another shootout, maybe an upset here. We don't know. But just come back for my primetime updates for some Clemson and Syracuse and other guys in action. Like, subscribe, follow, all that stuff. Peace.